Chapter 7. My mom had little time for me because she was the only one who could work in the fields. We had been given 5 shares of the village's field area by the party, one for each member of the family. My grandfather was now dead, and my grandmother far too old for agricultural labor. My father languished in prison, and I was still just a little child, so my mother had to manage this fairly large area of land on her own in order to bring in our quota of the harvest. Then she had to deliver it to the village elders. She only rarely had any help from the men and women of the community because she was supposed to bring in her quota by herself. Sometimes the Hoa brothers came to help us. The older brother was very strong and really got down to it. Some days they did as much work as my mother could do in a week. The older brother, Joaquin, would often play with me too. Those were happy times for me because he was so funny. I was allowed to ride on him as a horse. He carried me on his shoulders to our house in the village, and we would do Tai Chi like the grandmasters, although our version had very little in common with this traditional martial art. Even today he will still relate, to everyone's amusements, how I once did a pea on his head because I was laughing so much. But such carefree times were few and far between. My mother cried a lot in those years. Many people in the village could not understand why her husband was in prison. If he were a decent farmer, he shouldn't be behind bars, in their opinion. Other Christians hadn't been incarcerated, so he must have done something bad. In addition to this, my mom really didn't have a clue about farming. In her parents' house, her tasks had been cooking and housework. Her 5 siblings had worked on the land at that time. Now she, of all people, had to cultivate such a large acreage. But God stood at her side in this as well. It was important for us to bring in a good yield so that we could deliver it to the local leaders. If we did so, our share of the allocation from the central provision store would be assured for the whole of the year. We had no other income from rearing animals or factory work. As an example, my mom planted sweet potatoes, but she stuck them in so far apart that the other farmers laughed at her. Even the children made fun of my mother, which was hard for her to bear, but at the end of the summer came the harvest, and my mother dug bigger sweet potatoes out of the ground than anyone in the village had ever seen. She also didn't know how to sow wheat. She scattered the seeds much too closely and became a laughingstock again. But when a hailstorm destroyed all the crops in the area, our fields weren't as badly damaged because the wheat was so dense. These things were hints of the love of God for us and that He was carrying us through this time, even if we had to do it without my father. At that time, God also provided us with a bridge to reach other people. It was a very dry summer, and the wells in the yard and in the village square stopped giving water. Then we discovered a well in our own yard, which my grandfather had dug years ago. This still had water, so now the people came to us and asked for water. My mother was very trusting and let them scoop out the water themselves. She was, of course, concerned that our well might dry up, but she trusted that God would keep filling it up, just as He had done with the widow of Zephyreth's jug of oil in the Bible. Sometimes the people would be standing waiting with their pots and buckets as early as 5 in the morning, so there was lots of opportunity to talk. Many were surprised by my mom and grandmother's open generosity. Such behavior is very rare in China, as I've already said. Material assistance is normally only directed towards family members and other relations, not strangers, and certainly not those who say bad things about you, so our family's standing improved in the eyes of the village. Many new visitors came to the prayer meetings as a result of all this and became Christians. Generosity stemming from faith in God was the best possible sermon, understood by all.